Hello. So I am just coming on here to let you know that I am adding the most recent podcast recording that I did with Justin Leslie onto my TSC Talks podcast that I ran for 5 years or so that I wrapped up in 2022. I felt so strongly about the content of it and how it kind of brings a lot of things full circle for myself, for just the understanding that I now have about our medical systems and other systems of care based on when I first started, the discussions that I've had with various people in the time that I haven't been doing the podcast, as well as those that I had on the podcast. So it was a niche podcast, or it is a niche podcast reaching the community that's impacted by the condition called tuberous sclerosis complex that causes benign tumors to grow in different organs of the body. 3 children affected. It's had a profound impact on their lives, on my life, on many people's lives. Obviously, whenever there's someone that has a disability or some challenges like that, a dis-ease, as Justin will say in the interview, um, it creates ripples of challenges. So I did the podcast TSC Talks to open up to the community their experiences. A lot of people came on and talked to me, some doctors, some other professionals, not many doctors, I will say, but there were a lot of other professionals that did come on and kind of led me into the cannabis industry and the alternative realm of health. And so it was kind of an effort of gaining self-awareness, gaining awareness about the world and our systems that we're so dependent on, so many of us. So Justin Leslie was one of my very first guests on the podcast, and he came on after I'd been interviewing my children on their experience with this condition. And he was in college at the time, and his mother was a friend of mine, Dorina Leslie, and recommended that I interview him. And so I did, and it kind of just got my juices flowing for interviewing people that had this diagnosis, tuberous sclerosis complex, and were open and willing to share their lived experience and kind of talk it through. Just because I had felt so alone. And obviously, that's the reason I started the podcast, was outreach for myself as much as for anybody that would listen. So Justin, I stayed in touch with his mother, checked in with Justin. He checked in with me over the years. In fact, I believe he reached out to look for a job. And then I knew he was working at Project Veritas or at Pfizer. And I found that very, very interesting that he was working at Pfizer. And as you'll hear in the interview, how his understanding of the systems and medical understanding has shifted, 180 degrees. So, and as has mine. So I feel like there's been this trajectory that has happened where through our lived experience, we've realized that a lot of the ways that we were taught to think about this condition have shifted and changed. So it was really important that I interview him, and really grateful that he was willing to come on. He is sharing his experience working at Pfizer, learning more about the Rosacea, really the malfeasance in the pharmaceutical industry. I don't know how else you want to say it, however words that I think everybody's aware of now. A lot of deception, half-truths. And Justin just kept shining his light, kept questioning things as a very young man in positions where, he was responsible for a lot. That I just, hats off to him for walking through this and coming out so vulnerably sharing his experience and talking about his diagnosis with TSC, which he had a diagnosis later in life. Well, later than most are diagnosed, not later in life. He was only 10 years old, and he had a fairly mild diagnosis compared to many that are affected by this condition that have a more profound cognitive overall impact. So it's a huge range. And it's come to my awareness and understanding that the medical interventions that have been increasing in the requirements over the years, the Rosacea, exacerbate and amplify manifestations of this condition. And it's highly possible that the condition itself started in with some kind of vaccine damage to the genome and got passed down because it's a highly carries a lot of hereditary. It does come down through the genetic line. It's autosomal dominant. So, and it's a spontaneous mutation, as was Justin's. So for him to come on and talk about it a little and be vulnerable about it and go into his complete 380-degree change in how he understood medicine and wanting to go in and find a pharmaceutical and develop a pharmaceutical to create a cure, to kind of being in the outside of germ theory altogether and using a lot of alternative regimens to help him with his quality of life and in managing his TSC, which, like I said, is mild, is fantastic. So without further ado, I'm going to drop this podcast and you can listen to the whole thing. It's almost 2 hours. It's getting pulled off of YouTube. I can't really put it anywhere. So I'm putting it here. And this is another episode of TSC Talks with Justin Leslie, Truth Under Fire.